The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the enormous hall. Ambassador Zethkar walked slowly across the polished floor, his four eyes scanning the hundreds of alien faces that turned to watch him. His scaled skin shimmered under the bright lights as he made his way to the speaking platform at the center of the room. The other ambassadors whispered among themselves in dozens of different languages, creating a low buzz that filled the air like the sound of angry insects. At the far end of the hall sat Admiral Krexnos of the Zirian Empire. His massive form dominated the elevated platform where the Empire's representatives gathered. His black armor gleamed like the shell of some deadly beetle, and his 6 arms moved restlessly as he watched Zethkar approach. Behind him stood rows of Zirian officers, their red eyes glowing in the shadows of their helmets. Zethkar stepped onto the speaking platform and activated his translator. The small device attached to his throat began converting his native clicks and whistles into the common galactic language that all species could understand. "Honored members of the Council," Zethkar began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "I come before you today with urgent news about the third planet in the Sol system, the world the humans call Earth." A wave of laughter rippled through the chamber. Several ambassadors made dismissive gestures with their appendages. The humans were known throughout the galaxy as a backward species that had barely managed to leave their own planet. They used primitive chemical rockets and simple metal satellites. Their greatest achievement was a few small space stations orbiting their world. Admiral Krexnos leaned forward in his seat. "Ambassador Zethkar, surely you have not called this emergency session to discuss such an insignificant species. The Empire has important matters to consider. We do not have time to waste on primitives who still burn fossil fuels for energy." Zethkar's translator caught the edge of desperation in his voice as he continued. "That is exactly what I thought when my scouts first reported from the Sol system 3 cycles ago. The humans appeared to be exactly what our long-range sensors indicated, a young species taking its first hesitant steps into space. But Admiral, there are things about that world that do not match what we observe." The Zirian Admiral's laugh was like the grinding of metal on stone. What could possibly be unusual about a world full of creatures who still fight wars with chemical explosives and metal projectiles? Zethkar activated a holographic display that showed images from his scout ships. The 3-dimensional pictures showed Earth as it appeared from space. The blue and green planet looked peaceful and inviting. Small artificial satellites orbited the world in regular patterns. Simple space stations hung in the darkness like clusters of metal boxes connected by thin tubes. Primitive spacecraft moved slowly between the 3rd and 4th planets, their chemical engines leaving bright trails of exhaust. "This is what we see when we observe Earth from a distance," Zethkar explained. "Everything appears normal for a species at their level of development. But when my scouts moved closer and began detailed scans, they found anomalies that make no sense." He changed the display to show energy readings and sensor data. Lines of numbers and graphs filled the air above the platform. Most of the ambassadors looked confused by the technical information, but Admiral Krexnos studied the data with growing interest. "The electromagnetic signatures from Earth do not match what we should expect from their visible technology," Zethkar continued. "There are massive energy sources that appear to be completely hidden. The planet's magnetic field has been artificially modified in ways that require technology far beyond what humans should possess. Most disturbing of all, there are areas on the planet's surface that our deepest scans cannot penetrate." A Zirian science officer whispered something in Admiral Krexnos' ear. The Admiral's red eyes narrowed as he listened. When the officer finished speaking, Krexnos stood slowly to his full imposing height. "Even if what you say is true," the Admiral said, "it changes nothing. The Empire has conquered over 1,000 worlds. We have destroyed civilizations that had mastered technologies your scouts cannot even imagine. If the humans have some hidden capabilities, they will only make their defeat more interesting." Zethkar's 4 eyes widened with alarm. "Admiral, you do not understand what I am trying to tell you. My scouts detected weapon signatures that exceed anything in the Imperial arsenal. The energy readings suggest defensive systems that could withstand a full fleet bombardment. This is not a primitive world hiding a few advanced toys. This is something else entirely." The Admiral waved one of his 6 arms dismissively. "Impossible. Our intelligence networks span the galaxy. If Earth possessed such technology, we would know about it. Your sensors are malfunctioning, or your scouts are allowing their imagination to overcome their training." Other ambassadors began to speak up from their seats around the chamber. The representative from the Altarian Federation stood and clicked his mandibles together rapidly. "The Vorthan scouts have always been reliable in the past," the Altarian said. "Perhaps we should investigate these claims more thoroughly before the Empire takes action." Admiral Krexanos turned his burning gaze toward the Altarian ambassador. "The Empire does not require permission from this council to deal with primitive species. Earth falls within our expansion zone. If we choose to add their world to our domain, that is our right under galactic law." Zethkar tried once more to make them understand. "Admiral, I am begging you to reconsider. My scouts reported that Earth's apparent primitiveness might be an elaborate deception. The energy patterns they detected suggest the humans have been deliberately hiding their true capabilities for generations. This could be a trap." The chamber fell silent for a long moment. The idea that a species might deliberately appear weak to avoid attention was not entirely unknown in galactic history. Several civilizations had used such tactics to survive encounters with more powerful empires, but none had ever maintained such a deception on the scale Zethkar was suggesting. Admiral Krexnos's laughter echoed through the chamber like thunder. "A trap. You believe that creatures who still use wheeled vehicles on their planet's surface have somehow deceived the greatest intelligence network in the galaxy for centuries. Ambassador Zethkar, I think your fear of the Empire's expansion has affected your judgment." The Admiral turned to address the full chamber. "The Zarian Empire officially announces our intention to incorporate the Sol system into our domain. We will depart for Earth within one standard cycle. Any species that wishes to observe how the Empire deals with primitive worlds is welcome to send observers." Zethkar made one final desperate attempt. "Admiral, I have seen the sensor readings with my own eyes. Earth is not what it appears to be. If you attack that world, you may be walking into the most sophisticated trap in galactic history." Admiral Krexnos was already walking toward the chamber's exit, his officers falling into formation behind him. He paused at the doorway and looked back at the Vorthan ambassador. "Ambassador Zethkar, when Earth becomes another jewel in the Empire's crown, I will be sure to send you a recording of their surrender ceremony." The massive doors closed behind the Zerion delegation, with a sound like distant thunder. Zethkar stood alone on the speaking platform, staring at the sensor data that still floated in the air above him. Around the chamber, the other ambassadors began to file out, most of them shaking their heads at what they saw as typical Zerion arrogance, but a few remained in their seats, studying the energy readings with growing concern. The Altarian Federation's science advisor was running calculations on a portable computer. The Crystalline Collective's representative was comparing Zethkar's data with their own long-range observations of the Sol system. What they found in those numbers would haunt their dreams for cycles to come. Deep in the mathematical patterns and energy signatures was evidence that Earth was indeed hiding something vast and patient and utterly terrifying in its implications. The Empire never listened to warnings. That was their way. Their strength. Their pride. It would also be their downfall. 3 months before Admiral Krexnos dismissed the warnings at the Galactic Council, Dr. Alan Carter was working 16-hour days in a facility that did not officially exist. The underground complex stretched for miles beneath the Nevada desert, hidden from satellite observation and shielded from any form of detection the galaxy's most advanced civilizations might attempt. Alan's weathered hands moved quickly across holographic displays that showed mathematical equations no university textbook had ever contained. The laboratory around him hummed with energy from power sources that would have seemed impossible to anyone who believed. Earth was still struggling with primitive fusion technology. Banks of quantum computers processed calculations at speeds that bent the normal rules of space and time. In sealed chambers throughout the facility, devices of clearly alien origin sat partially disassembled while human engineers worked to understand principles that had taken other species thousands of years to develop. Captain Maria Santos walked into the laboratory, carrying a datapad that contained information so classified that only 12 people on Earth were authorized to read it. Her father had been one of the original scientists brought in to study the wreckage, recovered from the Roswell incident back in 1947, and she had grown up surrounded by secrets that could reshape humanity's place in the universe. Now she carried the weight of those secrets as the project director for the most important deception in human history. "Alan, we have a problem," Maria said as she approached his workstation. The deep space monitoring arrays are picking up massive fleet movements in the Outer Rim territories. Everything points to the Xerian Empire preparing for a major expansion operation. Alan looked up from his calculations, his tired eyes focusing on the data pad Maria held. For over 70 years, humanity had been intercepting alien communications and learning about the galaxy beyond their solar system. What they discovered had terrified them into the most elaborate con game ever attempted by an intelligent species. The galaxy was not a peaceful place where civilizations coexisted and shared knowledge. It was a hunting ground where advanced species preyed on weaker ones with casual efficiency. The Xerian Empire alone had destroyed over 50 civilizations in the past 1,000 years, always using the same basic pattern. They would study a species from a distance, identify their technological capabilities, and then arrive with just enough force to guarantee victory. Resistance was crushed, populations were enslaved or eliminated, and entire worlds became resources for the Empire's continued expansion. "Show me the intercepts," Alan said as he gestured for Maria to activate the main display screen. The wall-sized monitor came to life, showing fleet positions and communication logs that had been decoded by Earth's hidden quantum computers. The evidence was undeniable. The Xerian Empire was preparing to add Earth to their collection of conquered worlds. Maria's fingers moved across the control interface, bringing up files that contained humanity's greatest secret. "They think we're still using chemical rockets and basic satellites," she said. "Our electromagnetic masking systems have been feeding them false data for decades. Every time they point their sensors at Earth, they see exactly what we want them to see." The deception had begun almost by accident when human scientists first started analyzing the alien technology recovered from various crash sites throughout the 20th century. Early attempts to reverse engineer the devices had produced energy signatures that could have attracted unwanted attention from space. Dr. Richard Hayes, Maria's father, had developed the first primitive masking systems to hide their work. What started as simple camouflage had evolved into the most sophisticated intelligence operation in galactic history. "Bring up the current masking grid status," Alan requested as he moved to stand beside Maria. The display changed to show Earth as it appeared to alien sensors. The planet looked exactly like what the galaxy expected from a young civilization. Simple satellites orbited the world in predictable patterns. Primitive space stations served as waypoints for crewed spacecraft that moved between Earth and Mars, using chemical propulsion systems that left obvious exhaust trails. But the reality was far different. Hidden beneath the electromagnetic illusions were defense systems that made the Xerian Empire's most advanced technology look like Stone Age tools. Fusion reactors that could power entire continents operated from facilities buried miles underground. Spacecraft that could bend space-time itself hung invisibly in the asteroid belt, their hulls made from materials that had been perfected by studying a dozen different alien alloys. Weapon systems based on principles that most galactic civilizations had never imagined waited silently for the order to reveal themselves. "How long before they arrive?" Alan asked as he studied the fleet movement patterns on the display. Maria consulted her datapad and ran quick calculations based on the Empire's standard hyperspace travel speeds. Based on their current position and known technology, approximately 90 standard days, she replied. Long enough to complete the final preparations for Project Looking Glass, but not long enough to develop any new systems if something goes wrong. Alan nodded as he considered their options. Project Looking Glass was humanity's code name for the planned revelation of their true capabilities. For generations, human leaders had debated whether they should maintain their peaceful facade indefinitely, or eventually emerge as a galactic power. The approaching Xerian fleet had made that decision for them. "Contact General Stone and President Walsh," Alan said. "Tell them it's time for the full briefing. Every world leader needs to understand what we're really facing and what we're capable of doing about it." 2 days later, the most powerful people on Earth gathered in a conference room that existed in a dimension slightly removed from normal space-time. The technology that made such meetings possible had been adapted from devices found in wreckage that crashed in the Siberian wilderness in 1908. President Helen Walsh sat at the head of a table that could accommodate representatives from every major nation, without any of them having to travel more than a few feet from their home offices. General Patrick Stone activated a holographic display that showed the true scope of humanity's hidden civilization. Cities that existed entirely underground stretched beneath major population centers. Manufacturing facilities that produced materials stronger than anything the galaxy had ever seen operated in pocket dimensions that folded space around themselves. Starships that could cross the galaxy in days rather than years waited in hidden bases scattered throughout the solar system. Ladies and gentlemen, General Stone began, what you are seeing represents over 150 years of continuous development based on technology recovered from alien visitors. We are not the primitive species the galaxy believes us to be. We are quite possibly the most advanced civilization currently in existence. Secretary of Defense Roy Mitchell stood to address the group. The question before us is simple. Do we continue to hide our capabilities and hope the Xerian Empire loses interest in our world? Or do we reveal ourselves and take our place as a major galactic power? President Walsh looked around the table at the faces of leaders who had spent their entire careers managing humanity's greatest secret. What are our chances if we fight? Dr. Susan Wright, the physicist whose theoretical work had led to humanity's most devastating weapons, consulted her datapad before answering. Based on our analysis of Xerion technology and fleet capabilities, we estimate a 97% probability of complete victory with minimal human casualties. Their ships and weapons are approximately 200 years behind our current development level. The silence that followed that statement was profound. These leaders had grown up believing that humanity was a small and vulnerable species in a dangerous galaxy. Learning that they were actually the apex predators in a universe full of relatively primitive civilizations required a complete readjustment of their worldview. There's something else you need to know, Maria Santos said as she activated another display. Our deep space monitoring systems have been tracking over 300 different alien civilizations for the past 50 years. Most of them are significantly less advanced than the Xerion Empire. If we reveal our true capabilities, we won't just be defending Earth. We'll be changing the balance of power for the entire galaxy. President Walsh studied the star maps and fleet positions that filled the air above the conference table. Humanity had spent so long hiding that the idea of stepping into the galactic spotlight felt almost impossible to comprehend. But the approaching Xerion fleet had forced their hand. In 90 days, the most elaborate deception in history would either succeed beyond all expectations or fail catastrophically. Gentlemen, ladies, the president said finally, I think it's time the galaxy learned what humans are really capable of. Commander Ben Taylor was drinking his third cup of coffee when the deep space sensors at Monitoring Station Alpha detected the first hyperspace signatures at the edge of the solar system. The massive alien fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel exactly where human predictions had said they would appear, their energy signatures blazing across every detection grid Earth had secretly positioned throughout the outer system. Ben set down his coffee cup and watched as his tactical display filled with hundreds of red dots representing Xerion Empire warships. Rachel, start recording everything, Ben said to his tactical officer as she hunched over her sensor controls. Lieutenant Rachel Kim had been tracking alien fleet movements for 8 years, but she had never seen anything on this scale before. The Xerion ships were enormous, some of them stretching over 3 miles from bow to stern, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. At the communications console, Specialist Nick Roberts was already intercepting the alien transmissions and running them through the translation software that Earth had developed from decades of eavesdropping on galactic communications. The messages were exactly what human intelligence had predicted they would be. Standard conquest protocols demanding immediate surrender and threatening massive retaliation if Earth resisted. Sir, they're broadcasting surrender demands in 17 different languages, Nick reported as alien voices filled the monitoring station through speakers that converted the various clicks, whistles, and electronic tones into something human ears could understand. Admiral Krexnos is demanding that Earth's government present themselves for processing within 6 standard hours. Ben smiled grimly as he opened a secure communication channel to Earth Defense Command. For months, human leaders had been debating whether to maintain their facade of primitive technology or reveal their true capabilities immediately when the aliens arrived. The decision had finally been made at the highest levels of government. Earth would give the Xerion Empire exactly what they expected to see, right up until the moment they decided to demonstrate why attacking Earth was the worst mistake in galactic history. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, President Helen Walsh stood in the Situation Room that served as the nerve center for humanity's hidden military capabilities. The walls around her displayed information that would have seemed like science fiction to most people on Earth's surface. Real-time tracking data showed the positions of over 800 Xerion warships as they moved into siege formation around the planet. Defense grids that had been disguised as weather satellites for 50 years were powering up weapons that could rewrite the fundamental structure of matter itself. Secretary of Defense Roy Mitchell stood beside the main tactical display, watching as the alien fleet arranged itself in the classic pattern used by the Xerion Empire for planetary conquest. 3 rings of ships surrounded Earth at different distances, creating overlapping fields of fire that could destroy any defensive force a primitive civilization might attempt to deploy. It was a formation designed to intimidate species who had never seen technology more advanced than chemical rockets and metal spacecraft. "Ma'am, the aliens are moving into final position," Roy reported as he consulted the data streams flowing from monitoring stations throughout the solar system. "Admiral Krexnos appears to be following standard Xerion doctrine exactly as our intelligence predicted." President Walsh studied the tactical information with the calm expression of someone who held cards that her opponents could not even imagine. "Have our forces received their orders?" "Yes, ma'am. All defense platforms are maintaining their camouflage and waiting for your signal. The fleet commanders are ready to drop their stealth systems on your command. Every weapon system in the solar system is armed and targeting the alien ships." On the surface, the charade continued exactly as planned. Television news broadcasts showed panicked crowds gathering in major cities as primitive radar systems detected the massive alien presence above Earth. Government officials appeared before cameras to make desperate appeals for peaceful contact, while military leaders admitted that Earth's defenses were helpless. Against such advanced technology, everything the aliens saw confirmed their expectations of a backward civilization facing inevitable conquest. But hidden beneath the surface drama, the most advanced military force in galactic history was preparing to reveal itself. In secret bases scattered throughout the asteroid belt, human starships that could move faster than light and phase through solid matter waited for the order to decloak. On Earth itself, weapon systems based on principles that most alien civilizations had never discovered were powering up behind electromagnetic barriers that made them invisible to enemy sensors. The first test of human resolve came exactly 6 hours after the alien fleet's arrival. Admiral Krexnos had grown tired of waiting for Earth's surrender and decided to demonstrate the futility of resistance. His flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Stellar Crusher, moved into close orbit around Earth and targeted what appeared to be a helpless orbital research station. The research station looked exactly like what alien intelligence said it should be: a collection of simple metal modules connected by basic docking tubes, obviously constructed from primitive materials and powered by crude fusion reactors. It appeared to have no defensive capabilities beyond thin metal plating that would offer no protection against military-grade weapons. Dr. Sandra White was actually inside that research station when the Xerion flagship locked weapons on her position. As the chief engineer for Earth's orbital defense grid, she had spent 15 years designing systems that could masquerade as primitive technology while hiding capabilities that exceeded anything the galaxy had ever seen. The research station around her was actually one of the most heavily defended positions in human space, protected by shield generators that could absorb the full output of a star and redirect that energy back at attackers. "All personnel to combat stations," Sandra announced over the internal communication system as alien targeting scanners played across the station's hull. "This is not a drill. We are about to show the galaxy what happens when someone attacks a human installation." The Xerion flagship's main gun was a particle beam weapon capable of punching through the armor of any known starship. When Admiral Krexnos gave the order to fire, the beam struck the research station with enough energy to vaporize a small moon. For a moment, the alien crew watched their sensors, expecting to see debris and atmosphere venting into space. Instead, they saw something that defied everything they understood about physics and technology. The research station's shields absorbed the particle beam completely, storing the energy in containment fields that operated on principles no Xerion scientist had ever imagined. Then, before Admiral Krexnos could order a second shot, the station redirected that energy back at his flagship in a focused beam that was 10 times more powerful than the original attack. The Stellar Crusher's shields collapsed instantly under the redirected assault. The ship's armor plating, forged from the strongest materials the Xerion Empire could produce, melted like ice under the impossible energy levels focused on its hull. Massive explosions ripped through the dreadnought's interior as systems overloaded, and power cores lost containment. Within 30 seconds, the pride of the Xerian fleet was tumbling through space as a broken wreck, its hull cracked open and atmosphere venting from dozens of breaches. Admiral Krexnos pulled himself up from the deck of his command center, his black armor cracked and sparking from electrical overloads throughout the ship. Around him, his bridge crew stared at their instruments in disbelief as damage reports flooded in from every section of the vessel. The impossible had just happened. A primitive human space station had not only survived their most powerful weapon, but had sent that attack back at them with devastating force. "Science officer, explain what just occurred," Admiral Krexnos demanded as emergency lighting cast eerie shadows throughout the damaged bridge. The science officer, one of the Empire's most brilliant minds, consulted his instruments with trembling hands before reporting readings that made no sense according to everything the Xerian Empire knew about technology. "Sir, that station's defensive capabilities exceed our flagship's main weapons by a factor of 12, the science officer reported, his voice filled with fear that no Xerian warrior should ever display. "The energy absorption and redirection systems they employed are beyond anything in our databases. According to our sensors, they're using technology that shouldn't be possible." Throughout the Xerian fleet, similar reports were flooding in as ship commanders tried to understand what they had just witnessed. The humans were supposed to be a primitive species armed with chemical explosives and metal projectiles. They were not supposed to possess defensive technology that could casually destroy the Empire's most advanced warships. Admiral Krexnos stared at the tactical display showing his damaged flagship and the pristine human research station that had just demonstrated technological superiority over the greatest military force in the galaxy. For the first time in his military career, he began to suspect that the Xerian Empire had made a terrible mistake. On Earth, President Walsh watched the alien fleet's reaction. Captain Steve Clark received the authorization signal for Operation Daybreak, while his stealth destroyer was hidden in the shadow of Jupiter's largest moon. The USS Phantom had been waiting in complete silence for 3 weeks, its hull invisible to every form of detection the Xerian Empire possessed. Around him on the bridge, his crew of 30 hand-picked veterans prepared to participate in what would become the most one-sided battle in galactic history. "All hands. This is the captain," Steve announced over the ship's internal communication system as he watched the tactical display showing hundreds of alien warships surrounding Earth. "For over a century, humanity has hidden our true capabilities from the galaxy. Today we show them why Earth was never meant to be conquered." The Phantom dropped its stealth systems and appeared on Xerian sensors like a ghost materializing from nothing. But unlike the primitive human vessels the aliens expected to see, Steve's ship was 3 times larger than their biggest dreadnought, and armed with weapons that operated on principles the Empire's scientists had never imagined. As the destroyer's hull became visible, energy readings from its power system sent waves of panic through the alien fleet. Throughout the solar system, the trap that humanity had spent decades preparing finally revealed itself. What the Xerian Empire had dismissed as simple communication, satellites suddenly dropped their electromagnetic camouflage and emerged as massive weapons platforms bristling with particle cannons and quantum torpedo launchers. The humble asteroid mining operations that alien intelligence had noted in their reports decloaked to reveal battleships whose hulls were forged from materials that bent space around themselves. Dr. Susan Wright watched the engagement from the command bunker beneath Colorado as her theoretical physics research became a terrible reality for the invading fleet. The quantum displacement cannons she had designed were performing exactly as her calculations had predicted. Xerian warships found themselves targeted by weapons that ignored their shields completely, phasing through protective barriers as if they did not exist before, tearing apart hull plating at the molecular level. Admiral Krexnos stood on the damaged bridge of his flagship and stared in disbelief at sensor readings that defied everything the Empire knew about warfare. Human ships were appearing from nowhere, emerging from stealth systems so advanced that they had been completely undetectable even at close range. Worse, these vessels were not just hidden versions of primitive technology. They were clearly more advanced than anything in the Xerian arsenal. "All ships attack Formation 7, Admiral Krexnos commanded, falling back on military training when faced with the impossible. "Concentrate fire on the largest human vessels. Show them the power of the Empire. The alien fleet opened fire with everything they had. Hundreds of particle beams and plasma torpedoes streaked across space toward the human ships that had dared to reveal themselves. Energy weapons that could melt, asteroids and kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed converged on targets that should have been vaporized instantly by such overwhelming firepower. Instead, something happened that broke the spirit of every Xerion warrior who witnessed it. The human ships absorbed the incoming attacks without even slowing down. Their hulls, which appeared to be made of some impossible crystalline material, actually became brighter and more solid as energy weapons struck them. The defensive systems were not just stopping the alien attacks, they were feeding on them. Growing stronger with every shot fired, Captain Lisa Hayes commanded the human battleship Terra's Wrath from a bridge that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Her ship's main guns fired particle beams that restructured matter at the atomic level, turning Xerion hull armor into clouds of superheated gas that dispersed harmlessly into space. Around her, tactical displays showed the locations of over 200 alien vessels, all of them now identified as targets for immediate elimination. Target their command ships first, Lisa ordered as her weapons officer prepared to demonstrate why human military doctrine emphasized overwhelming superiority rather than fair fights. Let's show them what happens when someone threatens our home. The Terra's Wrath fired a single shot from its main weapon. The beam crossed the distance to the nearest Xerion dreadnought in less than a second, passing through the alien ship's shields as if they were made of tissue paper. When the particle stream struck the vessel's hull, the entire ship simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris field, no final transmission. One moment there was a 3-mile-long warship bristling with weapons. The next moment there was empty space and confused sensor echoes. Throughout the Xerion fleet, similar scenes played out as human ships demonstrated technological superiority that bordered on the supernatural. Alien vessels that had conquered 1,000 worlds found their weapons useless and their defenses meaningless against enemies who fought with tools that rewrote the fundamental laws of physics. Xerion crews watched in horror as their comrades vanished without trace, their ships deleted from existence by weapons they could not understand or counter. But the most terrifying aspect of the engagement was not the advanced human technology. It was the complete control that humanity demonstrated over every aspect of the battle. Xerion communication systems, protected by encryption that had never been broken in 1,000 years of warfare, were not just intercepted by human forces. They were answered by human operators speaking perfect Xerion battle cant in voices that showed no emotion whatsoever. Xerion vessel designation, Heavy Cruiser 847. "This is Human Fleet Command," came a calm human voice over Admiral Krexnos's emergency communication channel. "You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Failure to comply will result in immediate destruction." The Admiral stared at his communications officer, who was frantically checking his equipment to determine how the humans had accessed their most secure frequencies. "How are they doing this? Our communication systems use quantum encryption that should be impossible to break." Before anyone could answer, another human voice spoke over a different channel, this one addressing a Xerion destroyer that was trying to escape the battle zone. "Vessel attempting to flee, return to formation immediately. Your engines have been remotely disabled. Resistance is futile." The destroyer's captain reported that his ship's faster-than-light drive had indeed stopped functioning, though his engineers could find nothing wrong with the system. Somehow the humans were not just monitoring Xerion communications but actively controlling their technology from a distance. Commander Doug Williams coordinated the human response from the bridge of the command ship that served as the nerve center for Earth's defense network. His tactical display showed the positions of every alien vessel in the solar system, along with detailed information about their capabilities, crew complements, and current operational status. The data was coming not from external sensors, but from the alien ship's own computer systems, which human technology had infiltrated without triggering any alarms. "Colonel Johnson, we have complete control of their fleet networks," Doug reported to his ground-based counterpart who was managing the broader strategic situation. "Their ships are reporting to us more efficiently than they report to their own commanders." Colonel Amy Johnson stood in the situation room on Earth's surface, watching displays that showed the complete collapse of Xerion resistance throughout the solar system. Human forces had not just defeated the alien invasion, they had demonstrated such overwhelming technological superiority that continued fighting was meaningless. Every alien ship was outgunned, outmaneuvered. and completely dependent on systems that humans could control at will. Doug, signal all human vessels to cease offensive operations, Amy ordered as she watched Zarian ships throughout the fleet begin powering down their weapons in surrender. We've made our point. Now let's see if these aliens are smart enough to understand what just happened to them. The battle that Admiral Krexnos had expected to be a routine planetary conquest was over in less than 2 hours. Of the 800 warships he had brought to Earth, over 300 had been completely destroyed without inflicting a single casualty on human forces. The remaining vessels were dead in space, their weapons disabled and their engines controlled by human technology that had penetrated every system on their ships. Dr. Frank Lopez monitored the aftermath from his position in the Xenobiology Division, watching as human boarding parties prepared to take control of the surviving alien vessels. His job was to ensure that first contact procedures were followed correctly. Even though the circumstances were hardly what anyone had planned for peaceful interaction between species. Colonel Johnson, "We're receiving surrender transmissions from the Zarian flagship," Frank reported as Admiral Krexnos' broken voice came over the communication channels. "The Admiral is requesting permission to discuss terms for the survival of his remaining crew." Amy nodded as she considered humanity's next move. The demonstration of Earth's military capabilities had been even more successful than their most optimistic projections. The Zarian Empire's invasion force had been completely neutralized, without revealing more than a fraction of humanity's true technological potential. More importantly, the engagement had been record. Admiral Krexnos stood in a corridor aboard the human flagship Terra's Might and tried to understand how his perception of reality had been so completely wrong. The hallway around him seemed to extend infinitely in directions that his brain could not properly process, as if the human ship existed in more dimensions than the 3 his species had evolved to comprehend. The walls themselves appeared to be made of crystallized light that shifted between solid matter and pure energy depending on how he looked at them. "Admiral," Beth Parker approached him with an escort of humans who moved with mechanical precision that suggested cybernetic enhancement or genetic modification far beyond anything the Zarian Empire had achieved. Her uniform bore no rank insignia that Admiral Krexnos could recognize, but the way her crew deferred to her made it clear that she commanded authority over forces that could reshape the galaxy. "Admiral Krexnos," Beth said as her words were translated instantly by technology that seemed to read his thoughts before he could form them into language. "I hope you are beginning to understand the situation you have found yourself in." The defeated alien commander looked around at the impossible architecture of the human ship and realized that everything his species had believed about the galaxy was based on fundamental misunderstandings. "How long?" he asked through his translation device. "How long have your people possessed this level of technology?" Beth smiled with an expression that contained patience measured in geological timescales. "We began developing our current capabilities in the year you would designate as 1947 by your calendar system. That was when we recovered our first intact examples of galactic standard technology from visitors who experienced mechanical difficulties in our atmosphere." Admiral Krexnos felt his 4 hearts beating irregularly as the implications of that statement settled into his consciousness. The humans had been studying and improving alien technology for over 150 years, while carefully maintaining the appearance of a primitive civilization. The deception was so vast and so carefully orchestrated that it challenged everything he thought he knew about intelligence and strategic planning. "But why hide your capabilities?" Admiral Krexnos asked. "With technology like this, you could have conquered the entire galaxy decades ago." Beth's expression grew serious as she gestured toward a viewing port that showed the stars beyond the ship's hull. "Because we studied galactic history very carefully, Admiral. We learned about species like the Altarians, who developed advanced defensive technology, and were destroyed by a coalition of fearful neighbors. We read about the Crystalline Collective, who tried to share their knowledge peacefully and were enslaved by civilizations that used their own discoveries against them. The galaxy has a very consistent pattern of destroying what it fears, and it fears anything it does not understand." Captain Doug Williams was coordinating with ground-based operations from the ship's bridge, where holographic displays showed the positions of human forces throughout the solar system. The captured Zarian fleet was being processed by boarding parties who were cataloging alien technology and ensuring that no vessel retained the capability to threaten Earth. More importantly, they were using the alien ship's communication systems to broadcast a very specific message to every corner of the galaxy. Colonel Johnson, we have confirmation that the transmission has reached monitoring stations in all major star systems, Doug reported to his counterpart on Earth's surface. Every civilization with the capability to detect interstellar communications now knows that the Xerion invasion force has been defeated without the loss of a single human life. Colonel Amy Johnson stood in the Strategic Command Center beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching as alien governments across the galaxy began responding to news of the impossible battle. Some species were offering immediate diplomatic contact and trade agreements. Others were mobilizing their own military forces, apparently convinced that humanity represented a threat that needed to be eliminated before it could spread its influence further. Doug, we're receiving over 300 different first contact protocols from species that want to establish formal relations with Earth. Amy reported as communication officers throughout the command center worked to translate messages, arriving in dozens of alien languages. We're also tracking fleet movements from at least 12 different civilizations that appear to be preparing for military action against, as Dr. Frank Lopez stood beside President Walsh as they reviewed intelligence reports that painted a complex picture of galactic politics in the wake of humanity's revelation. As head of the Xenobiology Division, Frank had spent years studying the behavioral patterns of different alien species and predicting how they would react to the discovery that Earth was not the primitive world they had believed it to be. Madam President, the response patterns are exactly what we anticipated, Frank said as he consulted data streams flowing from monitoring stations throughout human space. The species that have survived through cooperation and diplomacy are reaching out with peaceful intentions. The ones that have built their civilizations on conquest and intimidation are treating us as a threat to be eliminated. President Walsh studied the star maps that showed the locations of potential allies and enemies spread across hundreds of light years of space. For over a century, humanity had been observers of galactic civilization, watching from the shadows as empires rose and fell while remaining invisible to the greater community of intelligent species. Now they were stepping onto a stage where their actions would affect the fate of thousands of worlds and billions of intelligent beings. Frank, what's your assessment of our position? The president asked as she considered the weight of decisions that would determine humanity's role in galactic affairs for generations to come. We are quite possibly the most technologically advanced species currently in existence, Frank replied after consulting his analysis of comparative technology levels. Our military capabilities exceed anything we have observed by factors that range from 10 to 1,000 depending on the specific civilization. More importantly, our industrial capacity and resource base are sufficient to support simultaneous conflicts with every hostile species in the galaxy, while continuing to advance our technology at current rates. Back aboard the Terra's Might, Admiral Krexnos was receiving an education in the true nature of galactic politics from Admiral Parker. She had activated displays that showed him the real scope of human intelligence gathering operations, revealing that Earth had been monitoring and analyzing every major civilization for decades while remaining completely undetected. Your empire has destroyed 57 different species in the past 1,000 years, Beth explained as holographic records showed the systematic elimination of entire civilizations by Xerion forces. Each time you followed the same pattern. Study the target species from a distance, identify their technological capabilities, then attack with just enough force to guarantee victory. Admiral Krexnos watched the historical records with growing shame as he saw his own species' actions from the perspective of their victims. We believed we were bringing order to the galaxy. Primitive species were incorporated into the Empire for their own protection and development. Beth's laugh was cold as space between stars. Admiral, you enslaved or eliminated every species you encountered. There was no protection, no development, only conquest. The only reason the Empire survived as long as it did was because you never encountered a civilization that was actually more advanced than yourselves. The truth was becoming clear to Admiral Krexnos as he processed everything Admiral Parker was showing him. The Xerion Empire had been operating under the assumption that they represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization. They had conquered lesser species with casual efficiency because they had never encountered anything that could challenge their technological superiority. Humanity represented something that had never existed in their experience, a species that was so far ahead of them technologically that resistance was not just futile but literally impossible. What happens now? Admiral Krexnos asked as he contemplated the complete collapse of everything his civilization had believed about its place in the universe. Beth gestured toward the viewing port again, where stars that had once seemed like distant lights now represented worlds that would soon learn about humanity's emergence as a galactic power. Now, Admiral, the galaxy learns to adapt to a new reality. Species that have survived through cooperation and peaceful development will find Earth to be a valuable ally and trading partner. Civilizations that have built their strength on conquest and oppression will discover that there are consequences for their actions that they never imagined possible. Dr. Susan Wright was monitoring the broader strategic situation from her laboratory on Earth, where quantum computers were processing intelligence data from across the galaxy at speeds that would have seemed impossible to any other civilization. The information they were gathering painted a picture of a galactic community that was about to experience fundamental changes that would reshape interstellar relations for millennia to come. President Walsh, we have confirmation that 7 different species have already announced the suspension of their territorial expansion programs. Susan R.